Good evening, everybody. Welcome to in, the May installment of the National At Home Dad Network's free webinar series. This month, we are talking about the joys and challenges of fostering and foster care. With us today, we have a couple of guests. We have Tim McMichael. Most of you might know him as a member of our organization. He also sits on the board of directors. Tim has been a foster parent now for almost 4 years, a total of 4 children, one of whom is still a foster child with them, 3 of whom he now has legal custody of. Our other guest is Will White. Will received his master's in social work from UNC here in Chapel Hill. He's worked in mental and behavioral health for over 15 years, and for the past 7 years, he's worked at the Right School, which is a treatment program for children with emotional and behavior disorders. His current role there is as a lead teacher counselor. He's a certified CPI instructor, a member of Right School's DEI Council, and has led parent workshops on the application of mindfulness practice with parents, caregivers, and their kids. Tim lives up in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, and Will actually lives on a small farm in Haw River, North Carolina, with his fiancee, soon-to-be stepdaughter. Let's see, goats, chickens, dogs, cats. What have I missed, Will?
Got sheep, a mini horse, and a rabbit.
Nice, nice. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming here with us. I know that this is a topic that some people know a whole lot about, and then you got people like me who don't really know a whole lot. Honestly, I've known people who have done foster care, and I've had a little bit of limited exposure to the system with my wife working in mental health as well. But there's a lot of questions that many of us have, and I'm just going to start off with a couple of the basic ones that I have. The chief one is, why exactly is it that children end up in the foster care system? And either one of y'all can jump on that.
Okay. Children, I'll start if that's all right with you, Tim. In my experience, children come into contact with the foster care system because someone has deemed that their previous placement, typically with their biological family, has placed them at risk for abuse or neglect, or it's been determined that they have in fact experienced those things.
Yep, and that's all. My foster kids have dealt with that, and they've got their own trauma, and that's one of the long hauls you got to learn to cope with them when you bring them in, is going through their tribulations and learning about their PTSD and that kind of stuff.
So obviously, this isn't a decision that anybody should jump into lightly in any capacity. I mean, this is a real commitment to these kids.
Yeah.
So the next question would be, how does one go about becoming a foster parent? I mean, that's more for Tim. Now, granted, I know that the requirements differ from state to state, so before anybody jumps on any of this, please check with whatever the laws are in your local area. But you're in Minnesota, so in Minnesota, like, typically, what kind of requirements are out there?
Well, ours was an emergency. My sister-in-law was dealing with her own drug issues, and they basically came down, the power company came to shut power down to the house because they weren't paying their bill or whatever, and there were 3 little kids in the house, and they couldn't shut down the power with kids in the house because it's inhumane. So they called the police, and that's where. So ours was emergency because it was through Indian Child Welfare, which is a fostering program for Indian reservations, and they're been around since like I think 1978, if I remember right, is when they really started kicking in and trying to keep families together or whatever. Because my first 3 were my niece and nephews, but basically to begin foster care, you have to usually take some classes in Minnesota, trainings, and you have to do like home inspections. They come in, inspect stuff, which we had to do that anyway, but ours was kind of like hit the ground running because the kids are here, but we got to like do all these inspections, make sure things are ready to go, if they're safe here, and Yeah, like CPR, first aid training. You have to do about 20 hours of training a year to keep your fostering license in place too.
Okay.
So it's like it's an overtime thing too. So every year you have to take training classes, and there's plenty of like online ones you can do. But yeah, yeah, it's nothing to just jump into and do. You have a lot of work to do and a lot of, and that's actually I became a stay-at-home dad is because we took in three more kids on top of the three we had, and it came to the point where yeah, where
Again,
my wife would it'd just be like
I have two at home. I cannot imagine. You have what, seven now?
seven. Well, I get seven, but our oldest lives up in Fargo now, so
Okay.
we still got six kids here, but yeah, so seven kids total, six living with us, and yeah, it's and homeschooling all of them too.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there are certain requirements as far as, you have to have like, you had talked about safety inspections and that type of thing.
Yep.
There needs to be a place, a safe home for them to live in. Are they required to each have their own bedroom, or can they room with another kid?
They can room with other kids, they just can't room with the opposite sex. So it's gotta be boys in one room, girls in one room, that kind of process. And then they're pretty like I said, Minnesota wise, like if we go down like my family lives like 5 hours away, so we want to go down there for a week one time to visit. The caseworker had to go down and do an interview with my parents because that's where we're staying. Because and then they had to do background checks on them too, because they have to do background checks. But if they're with staying someplace else, another place, more than like 72 hours, you're supposed to get a background check done on them, which is kind of a weird situation. But they've got to protect the kids, and
Oh, absolutely.
so yeah.
Which fits in a little bit more on the side of things that you handle, Will, is I know in your environment you work more with the kids than you do directly with the parents, although you do work with parents as well.
Mhm.
Um,
In a more limited capacity, yeah.
one of the things I was going to ask you is that do you find very often that you run into kids who aren't in a good, positive foster care situation, or most of the time, once they're fostered, they're in a much better place?
It's a tricky question to answer. I think that less foster parents, it's such an undertaking to try to take on all of the things that are involved in being a foster parent. Certainly the kids that are involved in the foster system, every single one of them has experienced some type of trauma, even if that trauma is simply the removal itself from their biological or primary home. The kids that I've worked with, I have worked with some kids that were initially the adults they were living with were initially foster parents and then went on to adopt them. We've also worked with kids whose the adults they were living with were still actively their foster parents. And we've also had kids that had been in several foster placements. I think back to one student we served. This was several years ago now, but I think he was on his 8th foster care placement.
And that's got to be rough.
It, yes, traumatic every time. And think about the messaging that is shared with one of those kids, even if not explicitly, but implicitly. What does this kid learn from that experience, having that experience time and time again?
That's got to be brutal on a kid's self-esteem. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I just can't imagine that being easy to deal with at all. And yeah, so with that in mind, and you talk about the hoops that have to be gone through, and the fact that a lot of these kids are coming from troubled backgrounds and the rest of it. Obviously, the whole and again, I'm older. I haven't heard this kind of thing recently, but I can remember back in the 80s and the early 90s, hearing the trope of, oh, well, people jump into foster care just so that they can get that check.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's not something that people would actually do, I'm assuming, based on the amount of work
If,
involved.
if there are people that do that, they learn in short order
There
that
are.
it's not that simple.
Okay. Well, that,
Yep.
that does make me feel much, much better. Now, one question I have, and Will, you could probably speak to this as much as Tim, is that when the foster children are placed in a home, do they actually get to continue to interact with their family, with their biological family?
Um, in my experience, it really kind of depends on the situation. In some cases, the children have been removed from the home, again, because it's been determined that they were at risk of abuse or neglect, or it was found that they had experienced that. Foster care, by its definition, is a sort of a transient thing. The goal tends either to be reunification with the child's primary family, or failing that, then to find a new and suitable placement home, in which case the goal often would be adoption, finding adoptive parents. Um, Again, it kind of depends on the situation. I have worked, previous to Right School, I'd worked actually teaching active parenting classes for parents who'd had their children removed from the home. Often that is a requirement that they undergo some formalized training in parenting skills. Um, there are, depending on the nature of the situation, they may also be required to undergo substance use or misuse counseling or treatment. Um, they, I think the exact requirements can vary, again, depending on the particular ins and outs of the situation.
Okay. So, in some cases, if parents are actively trying to get back into the lives of their children and they're doing the work to do so, it's not like there's a 0% chance of this child ever being reunited with their family.
Uh, yes, I'd say that's true. And unless the parent has signed what's called a TPR, or termination of parental rights,
Yep.
basically they've signed court documents that say, I am giving up all of my rights to this particular child. Outside of that context, they are still the parents and do have some rights for visitation, whatever the semantics or logistics of that might look like.
Yep.
Okay. And, you had already talked about some of the reasons why kids end up in foster care, and that definitely makes sense. How long do most of these kids stay in the system before they find a permanent home?
You can take that one too if you like. I feel like I might be talking too much.
Well, in Minnesota, they've got a 24-month process. They want to have the child either back with the biological parents, so the parents have to go like the hoops, the training, learning and proving themselves, whether it's being through sobriety or anger management problems or whatever. So like I said, Minnesota's got the 24-month process of getting that done, where they got 24 months from the first initial date of kids being taken from the home to get it back into place. Whereas working with ICW, they've got their sovereign law up here in Whitehurst, where they can their law kind of outruns the state law. So they moved theirs to 3 years, and I think we went 3.5 years before we finally got the legal custody, because mom kept pulling things, getting away with stuff, and that kind of thing. But yeah, usually, like I said, Minnesota, they've got a 24-month process of getting it going, and they want kids back into a home. Whereas the foster child we just got back in February, she's been in the system for 8 years now, and she's been up for adoption to 2 houses, and both fell through. And so now she's to the point where she's always changing caseworkers, and she's mentally beat. She's just tired of it, and she just got a new caseworker the other day, and they came and met us, and I can literally see in her face that she's like, she's done. She just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. So yeah, so it can be anywhere from 2 years to 8 years, and she's only 14. So
That's
yeah.
rough. And the school that you teach at, Will, what grades do they cover?
So we serve children ages 6 to 13, although I believe we've had 14-year-olds. As long as you are 13 at the time of the referral, you're still eligible for participation in the program. The
Okay.
elementary and middle school age children.
Yeah, I was gonna say basically grade school. By high school, they're no longer there.
Right.
So you've had kids that stay there for the length of the school that remain within the system?
Hmm.
Yep.
That's definitely on the rough side.
Yeah.
Now, on a more positive note, what are some of the benefits to the kids if they can get into a good, like, a good caring home, for lack of a better term? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the caring and having people that are willing to be there and actually parent is a lot more important than how many bedrooms or the rest of it that you have.
It's been my experience that children involved with the foster care system are very guarded, very, very hesitant to really be open and truly be themselves with adults. Which I think if you think about it, it really makes a lot of sense. Uh, these are kids that, through various life experiences, have had to really work to protect themselves. Um, the things that once served a very clear purpose for their survival and security might no longer once they're into a foster care setting. That said, I think as you can build that relationship with these kids, and you really start to see some of that shell and that wall crumble a little bit, and you start to get these glimpses of who they actually are as tiny humans. That can be very, very rewarding to feel like you have helped someone be more themselves.
Yep.
And what about you, Tim? I mean, you've actually gotten to spend years at a time with some of these kids. I mean,
Yep. Well, Will said, it is rewarding, and you do because like Raymond, he's 14. He's my nephew, but he calls me dad. He's called me dad for about 2 years now, so that's pretty awesome to have. Where his sister, she sometimes is dad, sometimes is uncle, which I don't expect him to call me mom, dad or mom or anything. I'm there to give him a good home, be a role model of what an adult, how to be an adult, adulting, that kind of stuff. But these kids, like my oldest and the one that we just got, like we were saying, they come, then they've got trauma, they got their own PTSD, and they're gonna have that guard all their time. Like the one we had just got recently, every once in a while you'll see that glimmer, that smile that you don't see very often, but then she'll catch herself and all of a sudden just kind of just like that, it's gone. It's like crap, it was right there. So, but it's rewarding to do because you're like my wife and I, we like to do family trips every year. We were gone for about a week or two, take them to go see other parts of the states of the U.S. and just get them out and see things that they'd never seen before. But with the pandemic this past year, we never got to do that. So we're looking forward to that this summer. But yeah, it's hard because they like their trauma, their PTSD, they're going to carry with them the rest of their lives. And the most we can do is try teaching them how to learn about it, how to cope with it, how to work with it. And but yeah,
and the foster care system. Now I know that you said you were working with the Indian Child Services.
yep,
I think I did I get that name right?
yep, yep.
Okay.
And there's different programs like there's a couple in their Becker County area where, and I can't remember, and Will can probably correct me on this, but they're kind of like a nonprofit where that's what they do is I think what like Will does, where they set up groups for parents to come, whether it's new foster parents or it's the bio parents who are trying to get custody of their kids back. They can go to them and work with them, but they also help. They're kind of like your advocate when you go to a foster when children are pulled out of the homes and working with the county and that kind of stuff. So I know there are organizations like that you can get hooked up with to get involved looking into foster care or whatever, but
Well, that was what I was going to ask is what kind of support do you generally get from, like, the organizations and the system, well, for lack of a better term, from the system?
I don't know if you've heard a lot of my stories when we've dealt with foster care the first time around with ICW. We had one lady, she was great, great woman, but her husband passed away unexpectedly in a motorcycle accident. And so she quit her job and so she'd be there for her family and her kids because, like I said, it was a very sudden. Actually, the kids witnessed the motorcycle accident, so that's where, right? And then they actually did foster care too, while she left. And then they brought on some other guy, which leads me to believe sometimes that some people don't belong in the foster care system working because this guy was horrible. There's a few times where well before the end he was moved out of our house. He was never allowed in our house. If he wanted to meet, we had to meet at the local cafe. had to meet with me and my wife because he did not know his role at all. Because he would like try forcing the kids to go to visits with mom when two of them were of age where they could choose if they wanted to go or not. And he would sit there and like based on they got to go and leaving them in tears and adding on to their trauma. And some stuff happened where he ended up by getting fired, and he's looking at some jail time or whatever for some other stuff. But then we got another lady after that. So like ICW, we've got a love-hate relationship. I love some of the people we worked with, but they don't have really much support for mental health for the foster kids. They just kind of give you we got you signed up for the like MNsure, Minnesota's version of insurance for the foster for people in the state and whatever can get, and they just give that, and you got to figure out your own mental health for them. Oh, okay. So, whereas a friend of mine who I got to know during the foster, he's got a program like that where he's like your advocate. He will go with you to the courts systems. He'll go with you to meet with the social workers. He will tell you what they're trying to do, what they're gonna do, or what you need to do, and he will fight for you. Which my wife and I never had that when we were on the first time around. So this time around, I'm actually more aware of everything that's going on, and it's actually what spurred me with like going back to school being a social worker is because the first time around and learning all this stuff that I didn't know that I should have known when we were doing it. So, but yeah.
Well, it's good to know I got better. I'm assuming that there's some sort of like monitoring or policing, well, not necessarily policing, but regulatory commission where if you have like a social worker or a caseworker who isn't doing the right thing, that there is somewhere you can report those people to?
Ours was the Minnesota Department of Health. We
Okay.
contacted them and they stepped in and started doing investigating, and it was shortly after that is where he actually he got in trouble for something else and he got let go. But yeah, they were investigating that and they were ignoring them, and so they had to show up one day on a Friday, just showed up and they had to talk to him or whatever. But yeah, we went around and ended up by doing that. So
And I'm assuming it's the same here in North Carolina, Will?
Yeah, as I understand it, the foster care system is regulated by the Department of Health and Human Services.
yeah.
Okay. So as a foster parent, you are not without recourse if you feel that, somehow or another the system isn't working in the child's best interest. You have somewhere you can go and raise a fuss.
Yep. Yep, and then it comes down to how fast it comes for them to get around to it. But yeah.
Certainly be able to report situations similar to what Tim's describing. I think in other cases, unfortunately, it may be, in my experience, the foster care system should be assumed to be somewhat synonymous with red tape. That as I understood you to say it, Matt, when the system is not meeting your needs as a foster parent or not meeting the needs of the child within the foster care system, sometimes there are things that can quickly be done about that, and sometimes there are not. But definitely in the case of a social worker who does not understand what the regulations are for a particular case on their caseload, that would be a problem. And I would expect at the very least you could contact their supervisor to levy a complaint.
Yeah, it's ICW was a headache, and they still are, and they always will be. But you just learn, like I said, I learned how to like rigmarole, how to roll with the punches and get around what they're trying to pull on you. And
I imagine that, like so many other mental health care and mental health care, social work, and that type of thing generally doesn't tend to be funded that well in this country. And we tend to be more reactionary in our trying to fix problems than proactive. I'd like to believe that if we did a little bit more of good social work and good mental health care early in our kids' lives and gave them the tools that they need, we would have a lot less problems later in kids' lives. And I'm sure that's kind of what Will's trying to do right now in the school that he's at. And, you're doing everything you can on your end as a foster parent, Tim.
Yeah.
Would y'all agree with that?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I definitely believe that when you cut funding, especially into child mental health, the funding that is cut on the front end winds up being paid out in triplicate on the other end, whether it be through burden on the healthcare system because of hospitalizations, burdens on treatment for drug or alcohol use or abuse, the criminal justice system because kids didn't have access to services where they could learn adaptive rather than maladaptive ways of coping with whatever issues they have that come up. There are so many different ways. It seems very short-sighted to me to think that you're doing a good thing by cutting funding to child mental health. Because that money's going to get paid out somewhere else, and usually in far higher numbers.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, Tim, one question I have as a foster parent, and again, I can't lie. I grew up a relatively privileged life. I grew up in an upper middle class suburb outside of New Orleans. We weren't the wealthiest family in town, but we certainly weren't worried about where the next meal was coming from or the bills getting paid either. I didn't know any kids that I knew of that were foster kids. There may or may not have been some in school when I was going there, but is there a stigma or, yeah, I mean, kids can be cruel. I mean, do they deal with pushback for being a foster kid when they go to school? I mean, is that something that you have to address as a parent?
We mostly for like mental stuff, like mental health, we'll bring up to like teachers that our children are foster kids. This is what's going on, but I don't think any of our kids have ever been picked on or teased for being in foster care system or whatever. So
That makes me feel better.
yeah, I'm sure there probably are ones out there that have done that, picked on people, or whatever, about things like that. But yeah, my kids have never had that issue, so thank God.
And it's not something that you run into in your work, Will?
I think we frequently enough have children that are involved in the foster care system, either currently or in the past, that in our context, it's not necessarily all that unusual.
Okay, that makes sense.
Um,
And they have children entering the foster care system at pretty much all ages. Am I correct?
to my knowledge, yes. And in fact, sort of an unspoken issue that a lot of folks you don't hear talked about as much is foster care is intended to be a transitionary setup. That again, the goal is either reunification with one's family or finding a permanent placement and adoption. There are children, however, that for one reason or another, neither of those goals end up being achieved. And once you turn 18, when you're in the foster care system, you are what they call age out and you are on your own. So there are a lot of, I don't want to say a lot, there are organizations that work to try to teach independent life skills for kids that are approaching age 18 that are involved in the foster care system that have not been adopted, so that when they age out of the foster care system, they're able to meet, their own basic needs, so that they don't wind up also having problems related to that.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah, I could see that being a real issue with these kids. I mean, is it common for a foster family, for a kid who ages out of foster care, just to be cut loose like that?
So I actually looked this up ahead of time. Every year, it's about 20,000 kids that age out of the foster.
And of the 20,000 that age out, are there any statistics that talk about how many of those age out and literally just get cut loose versus, actually have some sort of like safety net with a foster family, or, for lack of a better term, people who just care about them enough to keep track?
Sure, I don't have the exact information. If I were to hazard a guess, it's probably the majority that are just sort of on their own. depending on what social worker may have been involved with their case as they were approaching age 18, they may have been linked with resources they might be able to access. And again, I'm speaking from my own experience of things that I have seen or heard. But it does seem to be more often than not that these kids are sort of just on their own.
Yep. And then you get some of that are there just rare because I know some families who like they're a good family or whatever and business owners, but they had one foster son the day he turned 18, he had his bags packed and he walked out, and that was like 2 years ago. They haven't seen him since then. They've heard where he is, but he lived with them for almost 5 years. So and some kids they just got that trauma where they got stuck in the home and they want to get out, they want to go back to their family because they can't see their family because of the things that they did or whatever. And so this one instance, he did actually go back to his dad up in the area, and it doesn't sound like he was doing very well, but they did what they could for those 5 years they had him, trying to prep him for this. And like I said, the day he turned 18, he was up and gone. And yeah, it's sad. It's yeah.
I I would like to believe that there are more happy endings than there are endings that
Oh,
fall
and I'm sure there
into those
are.
categories. Unfortunately, like so many other things, you tend to only hear the bad news, not necessarily the good.
Yep.
Um, Honestly, Tim, if you could go back in time and tell the Tim of 4 years ago, these are the things you need to be aware of, what advice would you give you?
Um, do more research ahead of time instead of just going along the roll expecting them to help you. Because there is a whole knowledge of wealth with the internet and connecting with people and learning the things that I know now. What I would have benefited me back then, knowing when, like, especially with that one case where they came in and just screwed stuff up, and he set things back further for the whole legal process to get custody of him or whatever. But yeah, I would probably warn him that. But I don't think I would do
Do,
anything different. I keep telling my wife that I'm going to school to be a social worker because one day when my kids are older, I would like to have. She always gives me crap. It's called my Duggar house. I would like to have a house where because you've got kids that are in the system that are, they're just done with life. They're ready to just be done because talking to some people, there's a friend of mine, which I've known through ICW, and she's a social worker, and she's got a child now. He's a 12-year-old boy who the last year he's tried taking his life twice because he's just done with it because he's got anger management issues. He doesn't want nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, this is why I want my own house someday where I can bring in kids like that and try working with them. And so, yeah. So I don't think I'd do anything different. I would probably tell myself to keep going with it and just do more research and looking up on things and don't depend on other people to tell you what things are. Connect out to other people. So,
and I know you're in Minnesota, but are there any like national groups that you know of that would help like teach potential foster families or point for like I guess just point you in the right direction of where to look for information in your own state?
your county, go to your counties, the health places. Usually they can set you up because, like, there's some of these nonprofit organizations that will set up classes and programs. And then, like me being part of the Father Project, I'm trying to stem off that to open up doing uh like new foster parent classes, especially for dads. They can come in and they can ask questions. We can help them and do like weekly groups like we do now, but just have it for them to come in because they're always gonna have questions
Hmm.
and they need the support because it's foster care is not easy. If I know some people want to do it because yeah, but it's a mind game for yourself and everybody else involved with it. So there needs to be more groups like that, and that's kind of where I'm hoping to stem out a bit more too with time is just to open that up for people, get things like that going, helping parents and yeah, I just check like your county office, county health places, and that kind of thing. They should be able to help you or find anything that you need to do.
What about you, Will?
I'm sorry, what was the original question?
Was if you knew of any larger like database resources for where someone could go and look to find out information about specifically the foster care like rules and regulations in their home state or
Um,
places that would be willing to point them in the right direction to take the classes that they may need to take or whatever else to get the help they need?
well, sure. So I can only speak for the state of North Carolina. Um, I would start by going to the DHHS website. As I understand it, any families or individuals that are interested in becoming licensed foster parents, there's a training that they've got to complete. The acronym is TIPS MAP. That's Trauma Informed Partnering for Safety and Permanence, a model approach to partnerships in parenting. It's minimum 30-hour training course, but they cover a lot of the child welfare system, the role of foster and adoptive parents, participant skills in working with kids that have been through some of the things that kids in the foster care system have been through. So that would trying to find a local offering for TIPS MAP training would be a great place to start. Um, I would also encourage, Google searching. There are often, a lot of support groups that might be specific to your area. So, for me personally, I live close to what's called the Triangle: Durham, Raleigh, Chapel Hill. Um, so there might be something that's offered in this area that might not be offered in other parts of the state. So a little bit of Google searching might be able to help you find things that are more local to your immediate area.
Makes sense. Now, one question that I have, and I'm curious, you may or may not have a little bit of experience with this, Will, but I'm sure Tim does. How old were your kids, your biological kids, when you brought in your first foster children 4 years ago?
15, 4, and 2.
Okay. So you had a broad range.
Yeah.
What type of adaptation had to happen on their part? I mean, was it difficult? Was it difficult for the kids to suddenly have a new sibling in the house that didn't start off as a baby?
Um, it was like my son Timmy. He's was labeled high function autistic. So when they moved in, him and I went on quite a few walks, and that's when I started playing Pokemon. Because him and I go play Pokemon just helped him kind of clear his head. Because I know there's a lot more energy in the house for him, where he just didn't know how to like compute it or whatever. So, but within time, he kind of came around, and then him and Trevor, who is about a year older than him, are like best friends now. They share a room, they do things together. They're a year apart in school, 2 years apart in school. But yeah, it was a learning process. But well, my kids are all pretty open and don't want like Kaylee, who's 15 at the time. She loved it.
Okay. And Will, have you ever run into, issues with children integrating with like siblings in the homes?
Yeah, it certainly can present a bit of a challenge. Bringing foster children into the home, it's a major change for everyone in the household, for the parents, for the foster children, for the pre-existing children. Um, I've also, I think back to one particular case we worked with, where two siblings that were biologically related were both brought in as foster children, one of whom was older than the other and was very resistant to anybody trying to provide parenting other than the older sibling. Um, so there's so many different, I don't want to say minutia because it's all very important, but intricacies in relationships that can create certainly some challenges, to be sure.
So when you guys made this decision, and Tim, I know that you talked about how you kind of jumped into it, hitting the ground running with the situation with family. Um, was this something that you all discussed as a family? I mean, obviously you and your wife discussed it, but like your oldest child was 15. Was she in on that conversation?
Um, I don't think so, because like with for, like my niece and nephews, my wife and I looked at it for a few years, trying to like, figure out how to get custody of them to get them out of the situation, and it was something that if it came down where we could get it, we were gonna do it, and
So
so
it wasn't
yeah,
like a sudden surprise.
yes and no. We didn't expect it that soon. What happened or whatever, but yeah.
Fair. Fair. And the latest placement or the latest child that you guys brought in, that just recently joined you, was that something that you all discussed as a family?
We started doing foster respite care 3 years ago with her. So she'd come stay with us every once in a while when the family went, because it's like the family go on vacations, and if you leave the state, you have to put a request in with the state or with the ICW or the caseworker. They have to put it in front of a judge, and a judge has to clear if the child can go leave the state or not. If not, then they gotta stay back or whatever. And so we knew her for a couple of years, and my wife figured out the family relation between her and the young girl, and so. But so we always have, maybe since we're family, we could actually get custody of her and give her, then she'd be with family or whatever. But yeah, she was an emergency one too. They called us Friday night before the Super Bowl. Said, hey, she needs a place. Something happened. She needs a place. Will you guys take her? She wants to come with you guys. Yeah, hands down, go for it. My wife was at work. I was home with the kids, and
All right, now you used a term that I've never heard before, where you were saying that you had done respite care with her.
yeah,
Okay,
foster respite care.
so that's literally where, like, if the family has an emergency and has to leave town, and there's nobody to watch the kid, you're like a temporary foster family on call kind of
Yep,
thing.
yep. Because we're already licensed. We've already the program already knows us, and so yeah, and they've and people. I know one other family that my kids at school, they do that. They do respite care. They don't do the full-time foster care, but they do respite. They go through the process of getting their foster license just to do that
Well, I would say
with
that just
several different
answered my
kids.
next question was, can you do that without doing full foster care?
Yeah,
Interesting. So
yeah,
that might be a way to, I mean, granted, not necessarily trying to play with anybody's lives or anything, but that might be a way to like test the waters a little bit,
right,
because it's a lot easier to be like, yeah, we can take this kid for a week or two, and at the end of the week or two realize, okay, this is not something that our family is going to be able to do. Is probably better in the long run than jumping in head first and finding out 2 weeks after you took a full place.
right. And sometimes though, if you get those kids in your house just for a week or so, you really won't see the. I don't want to
Difficulties,
say that you. I don't. What's that?
challenges,
Yeah, you
difficulties.
won't see the challenges that might be there. You might just see the one side, and then when you bring them in, that's when you're gonna be like, oh yeah.
Well,
But still, it gives you an idea of what it's gonna be like and what you got to deal with. And
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I imagine that a lot of these kids, like many of us, understand that honeymoon period. I think we've all played that game where 2 weeks into dating someone, they really didn't know who you were. I think everybody has done that at one point or another.
yep, yep.
Well, honestly, at this point, we don't have a lot of people watching live today. I think part of that is honestly because of the timing, which, again, I appreciate you working your schedules to where we could get all three of us together. We do have a quick question right now that just came in from Michael Holder saying, do all of the children have such severe trauma and their guard up, or are there some cases where you have an easier time getting them to open up and bond?
Um, I would say the vast majority there's going to be trauma regardless of severity level. There's going to be a certain amount of guardedness. Um, to your point, Michael, I think sometimes it goes the opposite way, that the child is so desperate for an adult who could provide care for them that there's almost an unhealthy quickness in attaching to people they don't know very well. That there can be some disordered attachment related to that as well. But I would say it skews more frequently towards the defensiveness and guardedness than the other way around, at least in my experience.
And, and here's a fun question. Do you have to be a perfect parent to get into foster care, or pretty well adjusted?
is there such a thing as a perfect parent?
No,
Exactly.
no.
No.
I mean,
Nope.
I'm assuming that, there are certain base level criteria, like, they probably don't want you to have a criminal record. Probably no felonies are a definite no. I'm sure, speeding tickets and the rest of it aren't going to kill you, but if you got a few DUIs, that might be a red flag.
Yep.
I think I would imagine that Tim alluded to this earlier, baseline being able to demonstrate that your home is a home that is safe for children. Um,
Yep.
and I'm not sure exactly what the licensing requirements are in Minnesota, but certainly there's quite a vetting process in the state of North Carolina in order to get licensed to serve as a foster parent.
Yep. It
But
usually
again,
is.
oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Tim.
Minnesota's pretty good, like you said, pretty good vetting, sir. But when, like I said, we're throwing in an emergency, or they're like I said, we had people coming in our house for about a week and a half straight, checking things, going through this, going through that. Well, we can deal with this for now. We gotta get that fixed, and just small things or whatever. But yeah, they do full background checks. We had to have neighbors and friends like write letters on our behalf, even though their kids are still with us, and then they'd actually go back to the people that wrote the letters and talk to them, and
That
yeah,
makes
it's
sense.
a process to get it into it.
But I
So
mean, you don't have to run your house like some sort of, like strict nunnery. I mean, like, Tim, for instance, I know that you enjoy good craft beer. I'm sure that you and your wife have a drink on occasion, and that's not
yep,
really an issue. I'm sure that, for those people who actually, might hunt or be gun enthusiasts, like that's not going to rule anybody out, or most of the South would be ruled out, just provided that you have your guns properly secured and
yep,
stored and that type of thing.
yep,
I
yeah.
mean, it's
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 just
mostly just, common sense things.
right. And that's basically what it comes down to, is your common sense and giving them a good home and proving yourself. So you're trying to prove yourself to the kids, you're also trying to prove yourself to the foster care workers that come in to check out your house unexpectedly on random bases. And
Mhm.
Well, this is
yeah,
this is good. This is really interesting. I can honestly say this is something that has crossed my mind. Not anytime soon, because with my youngest being 4 and my daughter being 7, going on 35 now, I'm not quite ready to take on any new challenges.
Mhm.
But I feel like at some point down the road, life might slow down a little bit, and it might be nice to be able to think about opening up our heart and our home.
So, eh, what I'm hearing there, Matt, is honest self-evaluation, which I think is paramount in making a leap and decision like that. That it's not not something to be taken on lightly. Um,
no,
I think the communication between you and Angela, you got to be on the same page. Um, there are certain skills I think of as necessary for foster parents or would be foster parents, and one of those is that willingness to have that honest self-evaluation. Is this something
Well,
we're up for, given the full totality of our current life situation?
well, Angela, and you know for sure it's not like she would keep quiet about her opinions. Wouldn't have her any other way either.
No, of course not.
No, no, neither one of us are going to keep quiet about how we feel.
Mm.
Well, look, if there aren't any other questions, and I'm double checking on 2 different areas as well as what we have here live with us, and I'm not seeing any, I'm just going to thank you guys for coming to join us and giving us your time. I will point out that we do actually have our next webinar for June set up, and I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of excited about it because we're going to go back to something a little bit more lighthearted. Um, we're going to be doing it on Saturday, June the 26th at 8 p.m. because that is when our presenter is available. It will be shortly after he puts his newborn to bed. But Caleb is going to come and join us and talk about starting out doing home brewing of beer as a hobby.
Hmm.
You know, just a nice intro into a little hobby that everybody can enjoy. So hopefully we can get some people to join us next month. And again, that is on June the 26th at 8 p.m. And it's going to be starting out to brew your own beer at home. So on behalf of the National At Home Dad Network, I want to thank you guys for giving us your time and your knowledge. And to everybody who's watching this now, as well as the people who watch this later on our YouTube channel, where all of our previous webinars are available to watch whenever you would like. And anybody who wants to watch the replays on our Facebook page, please feel free, reach out to us. If you've come up with any additional questions, I can certainly get in touch with both Will and Tim, and we'll get some answers to you. So until next month, y'all have a great night, and we'll talk to you another time. Thanks.